Hi, welcome back to the SEScast. I'm Steve Earl Sweatshirt, and you're listening to one of my favorite songs of all time. The Taster was released on a 1969 album, An Evening with Wildman Fischer, a Frank Zappa-produced double LP of outsider music and spoken word by Larry Wildman Fischer. In my opinion, it's one of the best examples of outsider music, and the story of its writer is one of tragically debilitating mental illness, worsened by lack of treatment and bad experiences in the music industry. In this episode of the SEScast, I want to talk about Fischer's life and work. I'm going to analyze the song The Taster especially, and Fischer's place in both outsider art history and the establishment music industry. So here we go with episode 2 of the SEScast.
When the things of the past were just as good as the rest. Well, I knew a doctor, just the one certain doctor who goes around putting things in everyone's doctors. Come on, let's do the taster. When my love was so graced, when the things of the past were just as good as the rest. Well, I knew a
Before getting into Wildman Fischer's story, I want to define outsider music and give more examples of outsider musicians to listen to and learn about. Outsider music can be defined in contrast to the established music industry, or in other words, music acts that would not usually be signed to record labels, who will exclude artists who are not musically trained, who have mental illnesses, and who simply do not fit into the mold of a young, stylish pop musician marketable to mass audiences. For much of the 20th century, the means of production to record music was exclusive to the record industry, so it was much harder for an outsider musician to book studio time and get a record made. An exception is made in the case of Larry Fischer, whose first album was produced by Frank Zappa on the record label Zappa founded to showcase outsider music talent, Bizarre Records. Other early examples of outsider musicians whose work was recorded and commercially sold are Lucia Pamela, Moondog, and Tiny Tim. As punk, lo-fi, and DIY music scenes gained traction at the end of the 1970s and onward, the audience for self-released recordings of outsider music grew as well, with artists like Jandek, Peter Grugin, Wesley Willis, and Daniel Johnston gaining cult fan bases. Separating outsider music from these other genres of music that can share aesthetic similarities and are generally made outside of the music industry system by untrained musicians can be difficult. However, I think the distinction can be made in the conscious and purposeful avoidance of the music industry, conventional music sounds, and traditional song structures in genres like punk and noise. For instance, the career of Larry Fischer was characterized by his longing for acceptance from mainstream musicians and record companies. Fischer didn't make music that record company executives refused to put on wax because he was an anti-establishment punk who wanted to buck these norms, but rather he made music that was brilliantly unconventional despite him trying to write songs conforming to the pop sound of the day. This can be heard on The Taster, which is an emulation of dance-crazed single hits of the early 60s like Mashed Potato Time by D.D. Sharp, The Locomotion, and specifically Chubby Checker's The Twist. Zappa's production on the song is a tight wall of sound style rhythm and blues song with psychedelic elements that juxtaposes well with Fischer's scream-sung manic vocals. I find the song to be an example of how outsider music can be very palatable to a wide audience, and why, although the term outsider music can be useful in identifying an artist's work, music made by outsiders of the industry can be just as good and is just music in the end. Hopefully this gives you a good idea of what encompasses outsider music, despite the nebulous definition. Now, before circling back to analyzing the Taster's lyrics, let's begin the story of Larry Fischer's life and career. Fischer was born in 1944 in LA, where he would live for most of his life. His father died early in Fischer's life, and his mother was described by Larry's brother as loving but overwhelmed with taking care of the children on her own. Larry exhibited erratic behavior since childhood, especially loudly singing pop songs of the day, which his family discouraged. This behavior was labeled by Fischer as the PEP and can be identified as a symptom of bipolar disorder. When Larry was not manic, he was incredibly shy with few or no friends throughout his childhood. Tensions between Fischer and his mother developed in his later childhood, as Fischer described his mother as verbally and physically abusive to him. Fischer claims she treated him differently than the other siblings, even making Larry eat meals over the sink rather than at the table. Fischer also sang loudly in school, leading to his expulsion and enrollment in technical schools. A year later, at age 16, during a depressive episode and fight with his mother, Fischer threatened her with a knife. He was then hospitalized and received experimental drugs and treatments, including electroconvulsive therapy, all of which Fischer reacted negatively to. Fischer was released from the hospital and threatened his brother with a knife in a similar incident that led to his family largely disowning him and further institutionalization of Fischer. After these years of hospitalization, Fischer left treatment homeless and began busking on the streets of Los Angeles. He marketed original songs for a dime on street corners, where he gained notoriety among the burgeoning hippie-adjacent freak scene of LA. At one open mic talent show in the mid-60s, the king of rock and soul, Solomon Burke, gave Fischer the Wild Man moniker after seeing him perform. Around this time, Frank Zappa began a relationship with Fischer, culminating in the 1969 album An Evening with Wildman Fischer. Zappa produced this album of field-recorded performances of Fischer, spoken word, and songs with instrumental backing by Zappa and other members of the Mothers of Invention. The album did poorly in sales, as much of it comes across as Zappa jokingly sending up the music industry, especially the song The Madness and Ecstasy, which ironically portrays Fischer as a global celebrity and messianic figure. Fischer's fame did quickly rise during this time, as he appeared on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, where he was mocked. At the 1968 Rose Bowl concert, alongside musical greats like Janis Joplin, Buddy Guy, and Joan Baez, Wildman Fischer performed. He described this early gig as the highlight of his career, and claims Zappa's manager told him he had done so well he'd be paid $30 instead of the agreed-upon $25. However, this small success quickly faded after Fischer broke a bottle near one of Zappa's children, ending their relationship. At more successful times of his career, Fischer was known to act more erratic and paranoid under the pressure of increased fame. Delusions began to develop in Fischer's mind that established figures in the music industry, such as Zappa, were conspiring against his career and even threatening his life. Fischer returned to busking for dimes on places like the Sunset Strip for years. He also reportedly would buy season passes for Disneyland to quell his loneliness resulting from the loss of connection to his family, and to busk at the park. He did little work in music professionally during this period, except for a live album recorded in 1974 with the noise band Smegma, which was released in 1998 before returning to minor prominence as the face of Rhino Records. Fischer considered himself the mascot of Rhino. After recording the single Go to Rhino Records in 1975 and his 1977 album Wild Mania. These were the first original records Rhino released, as they previously only reissued classic songs. Fischer's work for Rhino introduced him to figures who would stoke the flames of his career into the 1980s, namely Dr. Demento and the novelty record producers Barnes and Barnes. The latter two would produce Fischer's next two albums, 1981's Pronounced Normal and Nothing Scary in 1984. These records take on a much darker tone in a lot of these songs, influenced by Fischer's negative experiences in the music industry. The title of his song, Don't Be a Singer, speaks for itself, but the song Frank is more disturbing. In it, he directly lambasts Frank Zappa, blaming his career decline on him and his blackballing.
I think about him all the time. You could say he's on my mind. Frank's got money in the bank. Frank owns my publishing rights. Frank doesn't let me sleep at night. Frank has a record in the top 10. Frank used to be a good friend.
This song received airplay on the Dr. Demento show, to which Zappa objected.
Frank Zappa as a guest on my show several times. And one time was right after the Wildman Fischer album had appeared that had the song Frank on it. And I decided that one of the things I do when Frank came to the studio that day was to play him that song and get his reaction to it. Unbeknownst to me, Frank had never heard the song before. He had not known that it existed. And he was just livid. He just turned purple with rage. He said, "Did you know that that man threatened my life? Did you know that that man tried to have me killed? How dare anybody put out a song like that by that man?" And it was all that I and my producer could do to keep Frank from canceling the interview right there. And he also got me to agree that I would not play the song Frank again.
Barnes and Barnes also produced a collaborative song by Fischer and Rosemary Clooney called It's a Hard Business. However, their professional relationship ended after Fischer physically assaulted one of the producers. Fischer's cult following grew from his songs being featured on the Dr. Demento program, and he even appeared on the show performing songs and being interviewed. In his interview, he goes into his influences on songs like The Taster.
Who are some of the people that you listen to, some of the music that you used to hear when you were a little boy?
Ray Peterson?
Mm-hmm. What, Tell Laura I Love
Presley?
Her? Elvis.
Shirelles?
Mm-hmm.
Chubby Checker?
Yeah.
In fact, he had a large influence on me a little bit.
Oh, in what way?
Well, you know how you write all those dance songs?
Mm-hmm.
Come on, baby. You notice a lot of my songs are dance songs. Have you ever listened to any of my albums?
The Mope. Yeah, that's a dance song.
Did you ever hear my last album I made?
Sure did.
You remember The Popper?
Sure.
That's a dance song. The Mope's a dance song. Most of my songs are dance songs.
Fischer's success during this time led to another increase in paranoia. He developed paranoid delusions from reading into messages he thought were hidden in popular works of media that involved numerous celebrities, including Mark Mothersbaugh of Devo, Weird Al Yankovic, Dr. Demento, Barnes & Barnes, and even Steven Spielberg. Fischer's untreated mental illness had left him living in fear that these powerful industry insiders were hurting his career and even ordering hits out on his life, specifically to cut him up and feed him to fish heads, like the Barnes & Barnes novelty song.
Don't ever get them mad at you, because if you get them mad, they get real crazy. Like this one time, I couldn't figure out if they were going to kill me or not. But I don't think that they would kill anybody. But at one time, I thought they were trying to kill me. I didn't think they were trying to kill me, but I thought they knew who was trying to kill me. And I ran away for months at a time. But basically, Barnes & Barnes wouldn't hurt a fly. But don't ever get them mad at you.
Fischer was largely inactive musically after these releases in the 80s. Fischer returned to the public eye after the release of a 2005 documentary about Fischer called Derailroaded, the filming of which triggered another cycle of paranoid delusions in Fischer that caused him to cut off contact from the filmmakers and live homeless for 6 months before showing up at his aunt's house and being taken in. After his aunt's own health began to fail, Fischer moved into an assisted living facility where he would reside until dying of heart failure in 2011. During his time at the facility, he was medicated and lost his creative drive. One of his final performances was in promotion of Derailroaded on the Jimmy Kimmel Show, and shows how Fischer was viewed by establishment media throughout his career as a joke.
Monkey versus donkey, monkey versus donkey. Monkey versus donkey, monkey versus donkey.
Wow, thank you, Larry. Larry Wildman Fischer. If you would like to be a part of Future Talent Showcase, everything okay, Larry?
Yeah, everything's okay.
All right. Go to our show page at abc.com. Hi, Larry. We'll be right back to talk to Larry. Have a seat, Larry.
While Fischer's conspiracy theories about being blackballed by specific celebrities were obviously manifestations of his mental illness, I think there is truth to Fischer's feelings of alienation from the music industry. As an outsider musician, the record industry is definitionally opposed to you, and Fischer was certainly taken advantage of by people like Frank Zappa and his manager, Ronan Martin, and Jimmy Kimmel, who were making money off of exhibiting a mentally ill homeless person, largely as a shocking joke and not a serious musical act. However, I think Zappa's work with Fischer also showcases Fischer's raw talent, especially on The Taster. Fischer's discography was largely recorded from field recordings of Fischer while busking or otherwise outdoors, with added studio instrumentation by producers. I don't think these recordings hold up as well as the more refined studio recordings with more conventional instrumentation such as The Taster, which is why I think The Taster is one of the best examples of outsider music, where it really pushes the conventions of the wall of sound pop style due to mostly Fischer's performance and delivery, not Zappa's production, aside from some psychedelic elements. Fischer's vocals on the song are in his usual scream-sung cadence, although he seems to channel his influence of Chubby Checker a bit. The lyrics to The Taster are emblematic of outsider music. On the surface, it's a silly, nonsensical song that revolves around a dance move that the listener is not instructed how to do or what it looks like in the song. This leaves a lot of its verses open to interpretation, and considering the time period Fischer wrote the song as a teenager, I have a theory that The Taster was written to express Fischer's memories of and feelings about his time institutionalized in psychiatric hospitals. This gives the song an exceedingly dark undertone, veiling the trauma he witnessed and experienced under the guise of a danceable pop hit. Most of the verses are about people that can be interpreted to be patients or staff at a psychiatric hospital. For instance, Fischer sings about a boy who goes around masting things and all around tasting things, meaning a person who puts inedible items in his mouth. Another verse is about a nurse who places things into people's purses, which can be interpreted to be expressing paranoid delusions about a nurse planting objects on people. Finally, he also mentions a doctor who puts things in people's octors, or eyes, a reference to the practice of lobotomizing people with mental illness by sliding rods through a person's eye socket and into their brain. With its dark and personal, albeit obscured lyrics, juxtaposed with the pleasing, full-bodied production by Zappa, The Taster is a quintessential outsider song. In its wide potential public appeal, but its bucking of conventional norms and lyrical content pertaining to Fischer's mental illness and past hospitalization, Fischer creates something harshly real and truly unique. In conclusion, the life and work of Wildman Fischer is a tragic story of an outsider being exploited for money and laughs. His artistry was discouraged by his family and, in my opinion, poorly fostered by opportunistic producers throughout his career. On the other hand, Fischer sang about how the more structured studio recording setting that I prefer stifled his creativity in the song When You Record Singers. And he also talks about how he prefers to record solo and a cappella in this clip from Dr. Demento that I'd like to close out the episode with. Thanks for listening. This has been Original Songs for a Dime, Larry Fisher's Outsider Life. See you next time.
Do you prefer singing them just by yourself, or would you rather have a band with you?
I prefer doing it by myself.
Just by yourself. Truly a unique way of going about the music business. But
yeah, I plan to get a group in the future. I mean, well, it's no, I think I'll stay by myself. Well, the thing is, it is a unique way. You're right. It's a hard way of doing it.
I mean, Pink Floyd needs $5 million worth of stuff to do their thing, but you?
But in this music business, if you come, you've got to have a band. You're right. Well, I'm going to stick a cappella. Don't you think I should stick a cappella?
Uh-huh. We love you the way you are, Larry.
Right? Why should I change, right? Don't you think I'm better than not having a band? I mean, I've had a few bands, but it doesn't... I enjoy it this way better. There's nothing wrong with that, right?
No, nothing at all.
Right?
Right, nothing at all.
laid back now.